Chapter 1: The Foundation and the Fall. The linoleum did not want to come out. Nora had been working the same corner for an hour, sliding the putty knife under a curl of yellowed vinyl that had been glued down since before either of them was born. She drove the blade flat along the subfloor and pushed. A strip the length of her forearm tore free and folded back with a dry crackle. She flicked it onto the pile by the doorway and fit the knife under the next seam. Behind her was their living room couch. They had bought it 6 years ago, the same week they got the keys, hauling it up the porch steps and laughing the whole way because it was hideous, brown, overstuffed, and the exact color of a grocery paper bag. Neither of them had ever wanted to replace it. It had held the two of them through 6 winters in this house. On the far wall, their wedding photo hung under a sheet of plastic drop cloth to keep the dust off it. They had been married 11 months. The plastic had gone cloudy, and the two people in the frame were pale shapes behind it now. Nora leaned into the scraper. The harsh rasp of metal against wood was the only sound in the room. For weeks, the house had been suffocatingly quiet. She caught herself tiptoeing down the hall, easing doors into their latches and leaving the radio off. Her husband was drowning in depression, and she felt overwhelmed. She spent every evening holding her breath, terrified of making it worse. She desperately wanted to carry the weight for him, but she didn't know where to start. The blade caught on a staple and skipped. A floorboard piece flew past her. Her husband had come in and lowered himself onto the bare plywood a few feet away, knees drawn up back against the couch. He didn't reach for the second scraper. He didn't say anything either. Nora kept going on habit, one more pass, and then she stopped and let the silence engulf her. She looked over. He was staring at his own hands and they were shaking. "I need to tell you something," he said. The words came out barely loud enough for her to hear. "I've known for a long time. I think part of me has always known." He pressed his palms flat to his thighs to hold them still. "I don't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. I feel like my body does not belong to me. I have always known that I'm a woman but could not find the courage to say it out loud. I don't want to be your husband anymore, but I would love to be your wife." Silence filled the room once more. The putty knife slid out of Nora's hand and hit the plywood with a flat metal clatter. She crossed the gap before she had decided to move, dropped to her knees, and pulled the person she loved against her chest. One hand closed around a fistful of dust-covered shirt at the small of a back she knew better than her own. She could feel the shaking come through the fabric, and the breath that broke against her neck, and the slow weight of a head lowering onto her shoulder. She held tighter. She did not let go. They stayed down on the floor for a long while. The only thing Nora could find to say was okay. And then, okay again, into hair that smelled like sawdust and the same shampoo as every other night. They never made it back upstairs. The work had pushed them out of the bedroom days before, and the mattress was on the dining room floor under the window with the sheets half tucked. They lay down on it in their work clothes. Nora kept one arm slung across her wife's back and stayed awake until her breathing slowed down and evened out. The morning light came in through the dining room window. Nora woke up first and didn't move. The light had crawled across the floor and reached the mattress, and it lay now along the face beside her, across a forehead that, in sleep, carried none of the heaviness it had worn for months. While Nora watched, her wife let out a breath, long and slow as her shoulders eased a half-inch down into the mattress. Nora drew in a breath of her own. Overnight, the dust had finally settled. For the first time she could remember, the air in the house was easy to take. Welcome to the Portal Library. Step through and let the magic begin. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday. The Woman I Married, a trans short story. Chapter 2: The Bloom and the Razor. 3 days later, Nora came downstairs to the sound of music, though it wasn't the radio playing. Her wife was humming a low, tuneless melody over the hiss of the coffee maker. She had the good mugs out, the ones they strictly saved for company, and she stood watching the pot fill without rushing. When she heard Nora on the stairs, she looked over and offered a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. "I was thinking we should go somewhere," she said, sliding a mug across the counter. "Portugal, or maybe just the coast if Portugal is too much, I don't know, just somewhere with water." Nora wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic but didn't take a sip. For months, the kitchen in the morning had been a tense space they both just moved through as quietly as possible, but now there was a woman standing in it, actively planning a holiday before 8 in the morning. Water sounds good, Nora said. Later that night, a low band of steam crept out from under the bathroom door. Nora pushed it open and found the mirror completely fogged to the edges. The air inside was thick and warm, smelling sharply of the green, minty shaving cream from the back of the medicine cabinet. Her wife sat on the lip of the tub wrapped in a towel, with one foot propped up on the cold porcelain and a disposable razor in her hand. A thick line of white foam ran up her shin. She tapped the razor against the rim of the sink, knocking loose a clump of cream and hair into the basin. "The fronts are fine," her wife murmured without looking up. "It's the backs. I can't quite see what I'm doing and I keep." She turned her calf toward the harsh vanity light, revealing a thin red line of blood beading right above her ankle. Nora knelt on the damp bath mat and simply held out her hand. For a second neither of them moved, and then her wife passed her the razor. Nora cupped the back of the ankle and lifted the foot to rest comfortably against her shoulder. She worked slowly and carefully, drawing the blade up the curve of the calf in long, even passes, and rinsing it under the tap between each stroke. The water ran warm over her knuckles as she gently turned the leg to reach the soft skin behind the knee. The tight muscle there finally went loose under her grip as her wife allowed her weight to fully settle. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds in the room were the running tap, the scrape of the blade, and a slow breath let out through her wife's nose when Nora pressed her thumb flat against the ankle to hold it steady. Nora rinsed the last of the minty foam away with a cupped handful of water before setting the razor on the edge of the sink. Her wife ran a palm up her own shin, feeling the smooth skin, and then turned to face the fogged mirror. Whatever she saw in that obscured reflection pulled a sudden, breathless smile out of her. Nora stood up from the mat, leaned over the sink, and wiped a clean arc through the condensation with the side of her hand. In that fresh streak of clear glass, she found her wife's eyes already locked onto hers. Chapter 3: The Public Gaze and the Name. The therapist's office was on the second floor of a converted brick Victorian building. Nora parked in the shaded lot below it with the engine idling and the air conditioning clicking softly against the afternoon heat. She had 10 minutes to spare, time she had deliberately built into her commute, and she sat staring straight ahead, her hands locked on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, just like she'd been taught at 16. The dark leather had worn pale and smooth under her left palm over the years, and she pressed her thumb hard into her grip. She wasn't the one transitioning, but as she watched a stranger push through the clinic's glass doors and hurry down the sidewalk, Nora realized the word didn't belong exclusively to her spouse. Earlier that week, a colleague in the staff lounge had gently asked how she was holding up, and Nora had frozen, completely lacking a script for the question. For 6 years, her entire baseline had rested on the absolute certainty of who waited for her at the end of the day. She reached up to adjust the rearview mirror, catching the tired lines around her own eyes, and physically snapped the sun visor back into place before shutting off the ignition. She had her own unfamiliar ground to cover. The cosmetics floor on the ground floor was a massive, intimidating expanse of white tile, polished chrome, and endless mirrors. Harsh fluorescent panels overhead cast a bright, unforgiving light that left nowhere to hide, doubling every shopper back at themselves in the glass display cases. Her wife walked a cautious step behind her with her sleeves pulled down over her knuckles, her gaze darting toward the other customers before quickly dropping back to the floor. When they reached the high-end beauty counter, she stopped dead in front of a towering display of glass foundation bottles, her posture going entirely rigid. A sharp-suited salesperson stepped around the register. "Can I help you two find something today?" Nora felt the woman beside her tense up, her thumb frantically working the hem of her sleeve. Without hesitation, Nora stepped into her space, caught her hand, and firmly laced their fingers together right where the salesperson could see. "We're looking for a daily foundation for my wife," Nora said, her voice steady. "Something light for fair skin, but with a little warmth to it." The salesperson didn't miss a beat. "Of course, let's find her exact match." She reached under the lighted glass display and produced 3 heavy bottles, setting them down with a sharp, clean clank against the countertop. Her wife remained frozen, her hand still anchored in Nora's grip, while the salesperson pumped 3 distinct drops of liquid onto a glass pallet. "May I try these on the jawline?" the woman asked, holding up a fresh, angled sponge. Her wife offered a tight, jerky nod. The sponge tapped against the skin of her jaw, cold, damp, and precise. 1, 2, 3 stripes against the harsh overhead glare. "The middle one undertone does not match," Nora said. She reached out with her free hand, gently catching her wife's chin and tilting her face toward the light. "But the one on the left, look at that. It disappears right into your neck." Her wife looked down into the small, illuminated countertop mirror. She slowly lifted her free hand and touched the blended edge of the makeup, her fingertips tracing the spot where the redness she had hidden for years simply vanished into smooth, even skin. The defensive posture she had carried since walking through the department store doors suddenly melted away, her shoulders dropping 2 full inches as she let out a long, shaky exhale. "We'll take the bottle on the left," Nora said, never taking her eyes off her wife's reflection. They didn't get back to the house until well after dark. The upstairs hallway was a narrow tunnel of exposed pine studs and gray drywall, the floorboards wrapped in a heavy, paint-splattered tarp that crackled loudly under their jeans as they sat down side by side. They had been trading potential names back and forth for over a week, though most of them felt clumsy and foreign. Her wife reached into her pocket and finally produced a crumpled, folded sheet of notebook paper. "Read one," Nora said, leaning her shoulder against the raw drywall. "Most of these are terrible," she warned, smoothing the paper over her knee. "I wrote down Chloe on Tuesday, but then I remembered that girl who threw a dodgeball at your head in the 7th grade." Nora laughed, the sound bouncing off the bare wood framing. "Definitely not Chloe, what else?" She looked down at the paper, tracing a dried blue smudge on the margin with her thumbnail, and then folded it back in half. "Jasmine," she said quietly, and then repeated with more confidence. "I think it's Jasmine." Nora reached over, caught the sticky wooden stir stick, and lifted it out of the primer can. She leaned forward and pressed the dripping wood against the dark gray drywall, drawing out the letters in thick, wet white paint, making them large enough to read from the bottom of the stairs. The J dripped slightly where the primer ran heavy, trailing a thin white bead down the wall. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the noisy plastic tarp and stared at the wet white letters. "Yeah," Jasmine whispered, her voice catching just a fraction. "That's me." I hope you're enjoying this story so far. Happy Pride Month. We will cover a story for each letter of the LGBTQIA spectrum this month. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 4: The Reignite. The bedroom light fixture weighed close to 15 pounds, and Nora held it over her head with both hands while Jasmine stripped the insulation off the ceiling wires. It was late October, but the room was warm from the baseboard heaters they had bled and repaired over the weekend. Jasmine stood on the second step of the fiberglass ladder in a faded gray tank top, her arms reaching upward into the junction box. Months of hormone therapy had begun to leave their mark. Nora watched the way the harsh overhead bulb caught the softened curve of Jasmine's shoulder, noting the new give in the muscle of her biceps as she twisted the copper strands together. Up close, the sharp, cedar-scent Jasmine had worn for years had given way to something warmer and quieter. A clean, subtle shift that hit Nora every time Jasmine leaned down to grab a wire nut from the ladder's shelf. "Hold the glass steady," Jasmine murmured, her knuckles brushing the plaster ceiling. "The mounting bracket is stripped on the left side." Nora adjusted her grip on the thick fluted glass, her forearms taking the ache. "I have it." Jasmine drove the final screw home with a short, sharp turn of her wrist, gently lowered the glass canopy over the threaded nipple, and stepped down onto the newly refinished pine floorboards. She reached up to wipe a bead of sweat from her collarbone, and then her hand stopped. Catching her own reflection in the dark, uncurtained bedroom window, Jasmine suddenly crossed both arms tightly over her chest. Her posture folded inward, her shoulders hunching forward to hide the tender, awkward transition of her torso under the thin cotton tank top. She looked down at the wire strippers in her hand, her jaw tightening. "Nothing fits right," Jasmine said. The words came out flat and defensive. "I spent an hour this morning trying to find a shirt that didn't make my shoulders look massive or pull across my chest. I look like someone wearing a costume that's 2 sizes too small. The room went completely still around them. The baseboard heater ticked once. Nora didn't offer a quick reassurance. She set the flathead screwdriver down on the windowsill, let the heavy silence settle, and closed the 2 steps between them. "Look at me," Nora said. Jasmine kept her gaze fixed on the floorboards. "Nora, don't." Nora reached out and took the wire strippers from Jasmine's grip. She dropped them onto the bare wood floor. The heavy steel clattered loudly against the pine, breaking the tension in the room. Before Jasmine could back away, Nora stepped into her space, placing both hands firmly on the bare skin of Jasmine's waist. The skin under her palms was noticeably softer than it had been in May, warm and responsive. Jasmine let out a sharp, ragged intake of breath, but she didn't pull back. Nora slid her hands slowly up the sides of Jasmine's ribcage, deliberately mapping the new contours of her torso, letting her touch linger where the cotton tank top met the line of her collarbone. She guided Jasmine backward until the edge of the mattress caught them behind the knees, and they went down together into the unmade sheets. There was no rush and no performance to maintain. Every place Nora's hands moved was an absolute, physical answer to the question Jasmine refused to say out loud, affirming the body beneath hers with a slow, deliberate certainty that left no room for doubt. For the first time in 6 years, the quiet in the bedroom wasn't something Nora had to carefully measure or fear. Much later, the bedroom had cooled back to the crisp chill of an autumn midnight. They lay side by side under the heavy duvet, their shoulders pressed together in the dark. Overhead, the new fluted glass fixture hung dark and secure against the ceiling. Jasmine reached out under the covers, found Nora's hand, and lazily traced the line of her knuckles with her thumb. "The yard will be ready by May," Jasmine whispered into the dark. Nora turned her head on the pillow. "The yard." "The grass will be filled in where we tore out the old deck," Jasmine said, her voice dropping, smooth and unhurried. "And the hydrangeas along the fence will be blooming. We could invite everyone out, put up some string lights, do the vows again." Nora turned her hand over under the warm duvet, catching Jasmine's fingers and lacing them tight with her own. "May sounds perfect," Nora said. Chapter 5: The Vow Renewal. The backyard smelled of damp spring earth, crushed fescue, and the roasted garlic from the catering trays lined up along the rebuilt brick patio. It was the second Saturday in May, and the dusk had settled into a clear, deep violet over the roofline. 50 people stood clustered across the lawn, colleagues from Nora's school, contractors Jasmine had worked alongside for years, and the tight, fierce knot of chosen family who had hauled lumber and painted drywall with them all winter. Overhead, 3 parallel strands of Edison bulbs burned yellow against the coming dark, strung from the eaves of the house to the cedar fence posts Jasmine had set in the ground herself. Inside the house, the upstairs bedroom was quiet, insulated from the laughter drifting up through the open windows. Jasmine stood facing the full-length mirror between the closets. She wore a sleeveless ivory dress with a clean, structural drape that fell straight to her ankles, the smooth fabric catching the warm glow of the bedside lamps. Her shoulders, the same broad, capable shoulders she had tried to hide under a faded tank top in October, held the silk with an effortless, quiet dignity. Nora stepped up behind her, caught the small metal zipper pull at the base of Jasmine's spine, and drew it upward. The metal teeth closed with a smooth, continuous zip, gathering the silk snugly against the small of Jasmine's back. There was no awkward pulling across the ribcage, and no hesitation in the mirror. Jasmine reached back, her hand finding Nora's, her rough, calloused carpenter's fingers slipping over Nora's knuckles to lock their hands together over her waist. "The hydrangeas actually bloomed," Jasmine said, her eyes meeting Nora's in the glass. Her voice carried none of the old, fragile tremor from before. It was rich and anchored. "I was convinced we planted them too late in the season." "You dug the beds deep enough," Nora said, resting her chin lightly against Jasmine's shoulder. "They just needed time to flourish." Jasmine turned in Nora's embrace, the ivory silk swishing softly. She reached up and smoothed a stray lock of hair behind Nora's ear, her thumb lingering on Nora's cheekbone. "Ready." "Ready," Nora said. They walked downstairs together and stepped out through the screen door onto the grass. The low hum of patio conversation cut off as the crowd turned toward the porch, replacing the chatter with a sudden, warm wave of applause and clinking glasses. Nora didn't look at the crowd. She kept her eyes anchored to the woman beside her as they walked hand in hand down the wooden porch steps and across the lawn, their heels sinking just a fraction into the thick, fresh sod where the rotting deck used to be. They stopped at the center of the yard, right beneath the middle strand of glowing string lights. A close friend from Jasmine's crew stepped forward holding a small turnwood bowl containing two heavy gold bands. There was no efficient reading, a long, philosophical preamble about societal hurdles or the passage of time. The people standing in a rough circle around them already knew their story over the last 12 months. Nora took the first gold band from the bowl. She took Jasmine's left hand, feeling the familiar, permanent roughness of the calluses along her palm and the slight bend in her index finger from an old job site fracture, and slid the ring over her knuckle. The solid weight of the warm metal settled firmly at the base of Jasmine's finger, sitting flush against her skin. 6 years ago, I stood in a different room and promised to love you through every season, Nora said, her voice carrying clear and steady into the quiet spring evening. Back then, I thought loving someone meant trying to fix whatever was hurting them. I spent months walking on tiptoe, trying to carry a weight I couldn't even see. But watching you step into the light this past year taught me that real partnership isn't about carrying someone else's burden. It's just standing firm, loving them and supporting them unconditionally. You are the bravest person I have ever known, and getting to meet my wife has been the greatest joy of my life. Jasmine took the second ring, her calloused fingers steady as she slid the matching gold onto Nora's left hand, locking their hands together between them. For a long time, I felt like a stranger moving through the dark, Jasmine said, her voice dropping low, rich and anchored in the evening air. I was terrified that if I finally turned the lights on, I would lose the only home I had ever built. But you didn't let me fall. You held on to me during the dark times, you held my hand when the world outside was too threatening, and you patiently waited for me to catch up to myself. Thank you for giving me the courage to stand here exactly as I am. You were my home then, Nora, and you are my home today. When they leaned in to kiss, the applause from the lawn broke loud and immediate, wrapping around them under the yellow canopy of string lights. Nora closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, her hands anchored firmly at Jasmine's waist, standing on solid, finished ground. Epilogue, happily ever after. The morning paper always arrived at 7, landing with a dull thud against the bottom of the porch steps. It was late October again, a year later. A sharp, early frost had settled over the neighborhood overnight, turning the backyard lawn a pale, brittle silver. Along the cedar fence, the hydrangeas had finally dropped their summer blooms, the dry stalks standing dormant and waiting for the spring. In the kitchen, the coffee maker finished its cycle with a quiet, familiar hiss. Nora stood at the counter in thick wool socks, pouring 2 cups. She didn't have to listen for footsteps on the stairs anymore. She already knew the exact cadence of Jasmine's walk, heavy but unhurried. Jasmine came into the kitchen wearing a flannel shirt padded against the morning chill, her hair tied back loosely at the nape of her neck. She didn't shrink from the bright morning sun pouring through the uncurtained window. She stepped right into the light, crossed the tile, and wrapped both arms around Nora from behind, resting her chin comfortably on Nora's shoulder. "It's freezing out there," Jasmine murmured, her voice warm against Nora's ear. "The bird bath is completely frozen over." Nora leaned back into the embrace, letting Jasmine's solid weight anchor her against the counter. She turned her head, catching Jasmine's jawline, and pressed a slow, lingering kiss just below her ear. "Then stay inside," Nora said softly. She handed a warm ceramic mug over her shoulder. Jasmine took it, their fingers brushing and locking together over the handle, 2 gold bands clinking lightly in the quiet, sunlit kitchen. There was nothing left to fix, and nothing left to hide. They just stood together in the warmth of the house they had built, watching the frost outside slowly melt into the grass. Quote of the week: "The body is not an anatomical object, it is a historical archive." Paul B. Preciado. Thank you for listening to The Woman I Married. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to hear more, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. New stories are uploaded every Friday. Happy Pride Month.